Welcome once again to The Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. The intent of this program, of course, is to educate, inform, and help you decide how to protect yourself, your family, and your business. It's information and resources and some anecdotes that may help you manage some issues yourself, or you'll be better prepared to work with the professional counsel you select. Of course, our goal, either way, is to help you save time, money, and achieve the best possible results. We welcome once again and thank our attorney, David Bazar,
Thank you, Deb.
from the Bazar and Associates law firm in East Providence, for sharing legal information and his insights in each of the sessions. So today, business succession planning, for example, using estate planning, etc., strategies to increase the chances of survival of a business, a family business, because of disability, retirement, death. Turns out it can be quite involved, complicated, but probably better to work with it proactively than manage the consequences later, which is why we're going to be tackling that. When you think about personal, family disputes, business interruption, lack of productivity, cash flow problems, we're going to tackle that. Operating issues, shareholder agreements, business valuations, insurance, so many things. So this is quite an adventure.
It is.
I guess it's about continuity and contingency. So how do you tackle it? What are the elements of it? Why does it matter to have a good plan?
So regardless of where it falls into an attorney's lap, whether it's part of an estate plan, because oftentimes we have clients come in who have a business or solely owned business or a family business of some type that's part of their estate plan, and so that automatically becomes part of the estate plan, and what are we going to do for succession planning? Or if it's the start of a business or a business that's been around for a little while and there are different types of partners, not related necessarily, who need to have a plan. So it come into a law firm's or come to the attention of a lawyer in many different ways, and in both of those ways from my office. But it doesn't matter what the format or the type of business it is or how it's formed. What really matters is how are we going to get it from this generation to the next, or from these owners to the next level of ownership.
So just to be specific, when you were mentioning doesn't matter the form, you mean whether it's an S Corp, an LLC, or whatever, or even if it's a sole proprietorship.
Well, even a sole proprietorship, because even as a sole proprietorship, if that's one of your major assets and you're running it and you have one of your 3 children involved in it, how are we going to get that business to the next generation and keep it successful?
And as you mentioned it, there are other reasons for having these kinds of plans, as I understand it, even providing for cash for the person who's likely to retire or may become disabled or eventually or prematurely kick off.
Right. So let's just take an example and run with that and see which direction it leads us. So if it's a new company or a company that's been in existence for a little while and there are 2 or 3 partners to the company, different families, not related, there's a number of different ways that you can plan for what's going to happen with that business next. And in that particular case, it may not be the issue of who's going to run the business, because if there are 3 partners in the business and they're all capable, we know where it can go. But how is the partner who may pass away before the other 2, or the owner who passes away earlier, going to be bought out? And many times it's a situation where we like our 3 partners, we all get along, but we don't want a family member or a spouse from the partner who dies to become our partner. We don't know how we can work with that person or that family. We know our relationship with this particular individual. So usually you'll put together a plan for what happens, a buyout plan, if you will, if somebody dies. And it's often funded with life insurance, and it can be, depending on the situation, a key man life insurance policy or a policy owned by the business on one of the partners to help fund the buyout. And there can be formulas for what the buyout will be. But that is a different type of concern and plan from the plan where there's maybe one person who's run a business for a number of years, and who's going to take it over and where are we going to go from there.
So in either of the situations, when you talk about something like an insurance that is supposed to help provide for the next steps and stages. So explain from your perspective, using either of those scenarios or formats of business, what that means and how it might plug into the plan.
Okay, so let's just say, for example, we have a business that's doing very well, and there are 3 partners, and the value of the business is $3 million. So they each own it equally, so they each have a stock or interest or a partnership interest or an LLC membership interest of $1 million. So what we might do, if it's affordable, is have the 2 partners buy a life insurance on the 3rd partner, or depending on how we want to do this tax-wise, and we always bring in the LLC or the company's accountant to determine what's the best setup to do. You might have the business own the life insurance policy on each of them, and then depending on how it is going to be set up, the business may buy back the interest of the partner who dies, or if it's owned by the 2 other partners, they may buy back the interest on the partner who dies. And so if you can afford to fund it fully, you might use the life insurance to buy back the interest of the partner who dies. You might not be able to afford to fund it fully, so you might have a part buyout and a part buyout over time of the stock. But again, there's different ways to do it, and you might have an agreement on what the value is, or you might say at the time of death, we will agree to an appraisal and evaluation and set the value at that time.
So you mentioned an accountant. It certainly makes sense from the actual actuarial standpoint that you might call someone. Might an accountant call you in if they are dealing with a client's tax issues and plans, and use your legal expertise? And then, since neither one of you, neither the accountant nor the lawyer, is an insurance person, and you're not, I assume you're not selling insurance, then you have to bring in other people. Is this
Sure.
part of a concerted effort that takes place over a good deal of time, or how does that work?
Yeah, of course. You would want as many professionals at the table as you can. The accountant might help us set up what the best tax plan is for the buyout. The accountant might help set a value if it's the accountant for the company, to say, well, this is the value now. Do we want to set the value now, or do we want to set some kind of formula in place to set it at the time of death? And then, of course, putting the legal frame around it by a purchase and sale agreement or buy-sell agreement between the partners, or some other buyout agreement through the company. That needs to be done by the lawyer. And of course, if we're going to fund it through a life insurance policy, what type of policy do you want? Will the company own it? Will the partners own it? And how much is affordable and how much is reasonable?
So if you're doing estate planning for someone who has a business, that business needs business valuation. There are many ways in which you can do it. I guess it also needs to be reevaluated periodically. Do you end up needing to take on that hat as well? Do you need to call in yet another set of people? Do attorneys generally call in different attorneys to handle it? Do you try to keep it under one roof? How do you work with that, David?
Well, now we're talking an estate plan.
Yes.
So certainly we are able to handle, on the legal end, all of those issues. What we would need to do is bring in either a financial planner if they have one, whoever the professional is they're working with, the accountant, the financial planner, life insurance professionals, whoever they have, or if they don't have them, we do have people we work with that we could recommend and bring in. And what you want to do is, from the estate plan side, is to look at the whole estate, the corporate side of the estate, the business, and say, what's the value of this? What's the family? And again, remember, when we do our estate plans, we do them from the perspective of family first. It's people and property that go into the plan. Who are the people? What are their roles in the business or not in the business? How do they get along? Is it a situation where we can leave the ownership of the business equally to the 3 children, if there are 3 children, and they get along and that'll be not an issue? Or is there just one child in there and we want to maybe offset some of the value of the estate and other assets to the 2 children who aren't involved in the business, and leave the one child perhaps the business? There's a lot of different factors that can go into that, and it's really based on family dynamics as much as it is on the type of business and the other assets in the estate.
So do you become a psychiatrist, psychologist too? Because at some point, if you're dealing with family, you get to know the family, the players, perhaps the children. Maybe some of them are working in the business, maybe some are motivated to take on the business, but maybe they don't have the requisite skills, but you could certainly try to help them determine what skills they need and fill in the blanks or the gaps as they move along. Do you end up getting involved with that? I mean, you're not a business manager, but you can certainly give some guidance. How does that piece of it play out?
It's all counseling, so it's legal counseling and not really family counseling, but there is some aspect of that. But really what it is we've had a lot of experience in what works and what doesn't work and in different dynamics, so that just like in the law, when you have a case that you want to have precedent for from the Supreme Court, for example, you have to look at cases and analogize, well, my case is like that set of facts. Well, the person who comes in to see you, their set of facts may be similar to another set of facts that you had, and you can give advice on what worked or didn't work in some of those other cases. So when the person comes in and says, okay, we sit down, here's my family dynamic, this is the child who really is involved in the business, and these other two will not be ever involved and won't get along, well, then we can take our lead from that and give some advice as to how we might want to structure the business succession plan for that and what other aspects we might want. For example, again, you might use life insurance as part of that plan to say, okay, there will be this buy-sell agreement in place, or something in the estate planning documents that say, if something happens to me, the business owner, and I die and my wife, or in my case, my wife has predeceased me, my children will get bought out in the following manner, and part of it might be funded with life insurance, or it might be funded with other assets that are already in the estate.
Interesting. So just in this short period of time, you've been playing out some of the elements and some of the complexities. It wasn't surprising to see that there is of course, online, we want to provide resources for people. There's a DIY cheat sheet that's available, downloadable, fill in the blanks, even a business succession planning for dummies.com. And it seems that with those charts, it would be oh so easy to fill in these names and these amounts. With the story that you're playing out, it seems very likely that might be a good starting place for someone to walk into your office, but clearly this could not be a legal, binding, or even reasonable thing for someone to completely do it themselves?
It would be a good start.
A good
but
start.
But to use that as the plan, it's just so fraught with so many other issues that probably haven't been thought through, and the plan itself may not have all the legal requirements in place and all the financial requirements in place. So while the thought of what you might want to do could very well be covered in some of the do-it-yourself documents, I don't know that those will give you the advice. I don't think documents give you any advice, to be honest. To know, well, here's what you need to look at, and here's some experience that we've had in some of what you're thinking, and your thinking may be perfectly correct, or there may be some flaws in the thinking that need to get pointed out. And so that's the difference between hiring an attorney to help give you advice and counsel you through things, as opposed to just hiring someone or online someplace to get documents. Documents don't resolve issues, they can create issues.
Sounds like they can. And of course, from my standpoint too, in the years of doing some business counseling, you wouldn't be surprised to hear that there are some recent statistics such as only 30% of family businesses survive that second generation when it is turned to a family member. And then the third generation out, that number goes down to something like 12%. So certainly there's some good reason to be very cautious about how to deal with who's next and who's next in place.
And it falls into two categories. And one of the categories is, did you set it up correctly with the right family dynamic so that it can survive? And does the next generation have the capability to keep the business thriving and growing? And is it maybe an idea that there's a time to sell? And it depends on the type of business. In some businesses, you can sell easily. Other businesses, you can't sell at all, really. For example, sole proprietorship or sole partner law firms, just individual law firms, sole practitioners. There's a need, you can't say, I'm going to have my daughter take over my law practice if my daughter's not a lawyer.
Correct, certainly.
So you have that issue. And there are ways for sole practitioners or small firms to plan for the next succession of their practice, of what's going to happen with it, just like medical practices and those types of things. So there's very important planning that needs to go into that. And as an attorney gets older or a doctor gets older and they know what their family situation is or their practice, they may be part of a bigger practice. And of course, if you're part of a bigger practice, that practice probably has a formula for buying your share out. But if you're on your own, there are things you can do and there are ways to plan for that. And so that's something that we help people with every day.
So let's follow up with that for a moment, David. Give us a scenario where someone is a sole proprietor. You can determine whether there's a child that could do it or not. But what would be some of the options, or perhaps some anecdote that you could share with us about that?
Well, we've had Larry Barron on with us before, and I worked with Larry before, and he has been working primarily on his own up until a few years ago. But Larry planned very well for December 31st, 2019, I'm retiring. And so he and I have actually worked together to have a succession plan for him where I've moved into that practice area. I'm working with him on it. I've been doing it for a number of years. I did it before. And his clients have a soft landing place, and he has a way of being bought out of his business so that there's a plan in place. His children aren't lawyers. It wasn't going to be something where he could pass it along that way. But we put together a plan for Larry that gives him, I guess he would call it a soft landing spot, and his clients are all taken care of, and his practice goes on.
So interestingly, so that must mean for him, there is some cash in retirement for him to be financially taken care of, and then for him to take care of his clients. You've been part of that, or that of the person, you've been part of that. And the issue about those who just and only worked with Larry, there's an issue about credibility when suddenly someone just passes the baton without some sort of segue and a way
Right.
to transition and have that client feel comfortable with you continuing.
In this particular instance, Larry has 2 employees who are now my employees, who have been with him for 28 years and 15 years, who all the clients know and love, and they're very competent, and they have the history and the background of a lot of what's been going on, and they're staying with us. So we've not only provided for Larry's clients, we've provided for his employees, and we provided for Larry. So it's a plan that we were able to put in place. That's something, depending on what your practice is as a doctor or another attorney, that we could help counsel you through and help try to find you the situation that works for you.
So in part of the succession planning, an attorney who's working with a business owner, might they also get as involved in, gee, I know you'd like to have your son or your daughter take over, but clearly he's not motivated, not capable, or he needs, let's strategize about how to get him equipped, give him the training, give him some OJT somehow. Do you go through those nitty-gritty steps on the one side, and on the other, the person who wants to be bought out might need long-term retirement planning and finances to go? Do you deal with both sides of those issues as a management person?
So on the buyout part, there's a lot of ways to have someone bought out. It can be bought out over time. It can be by a sale to another entity. It can be through that insurance we talked about. I've worked with clients who have had children come in who have some ability, but not the experience. And so we've put together plans where they bring someone in from the outside who may have had their own company and sold it and are somewhat retired now, but have a great deal of experience in the industry that they might be dealing with, who will come in maybe full-time, maybe part-time, to lend advice and help and support to the person who's being brought in to be trained and take over. So we've had plans like that. So there are a number of different ways that, depending on what, again, we go back to the family dynamic is, and in that case, that particular example, there was a child who did have the interest and the ability, but not the experience to jump in and take over. But we put a plan together where there was somebody brought in to help that transition.
And how about if it's not a child, but rather employees who you'd like to move along? So there's value, I guess, in having them trained, but there's also like executive benefit packages will mete out certain percentages over a period of time so that that person has more of a vested interest, more of a commitment not to walk. I mean, all those sundry things that go on. So do you end up dealing with the nitty-gritty of that as well, David?
Sure. And you can go from a full-fledged ESOP, they call it, employee stock option plan, where you're actually, the employees are buying the business and they own the business, to a key employee maybe stepping up in getting ownership and moving up into the full management role and being taken care of that way. So there are a number of different ways that can happen. And certainly, if there's a situation, let's just talk about a family business where there's no one in the family who's ready or able to step up, but there's been longtime employees who are, those may be the natural persons or people to buy out the business.
And do you clue those people in that this is the direction it's going so that they're less likely to leave because they're anticipating some change or whatever?
Sure.
Do you do that?
Every business is different, and so you have to know what the dynamic is and where it's going. But certainly at some point in time, they need to be at the table because maybe they're not interested in doing what you want to do. So you have to have conversations and have people involved.
And the contingencies too. Address, if you will, for a moment, the issue about cash flow. Many businesses have issues about it, but when you start to work with someone, say it's at a time when the economy is good, the business is doing well, it has a good client base, and then later on, as it gets closer to the time when the person retires or something else happens, the business changes, the economy changes, whatever changes. Change is constant. How do you take care of evening out or making sure the cash flow and liquidity isn't a problem during all of these ups and downs?
Well, there are two different issues that are sort of raised by your question. One of them to me would have been, well, we made an agreement for a purchase and sale of stock or buy-sell agreement at date one.
At that snapshot time.
Yeah, but now, many years later, when it's time to come into play, the value of the business has changed because the economy has changed. And so, again, that's one of the things you could take care of at the beginning, to say, we're not going to set the exact value today. We're going to set in place a way down the road when this comes up as to how we're going to figure out what the value is. So that would take care of that part of it. As far as the liquidity and the cash flow, that's more of a business management kind of question. It's not really a legal question. So other than having a plan in place for funding with life insurance or some other thing, there's not a whole lot of planning you can do for that, except to say that if we're going to have a buyout and we want it to be a cash buyout and we don't know what the cash will be at that time, either we have to have a plan to set money aside for it, or we have to have some funding vehicle like life insurance.
Good, thank you. From your experience, what would you say is one of the biggest obstacles that the person who wants to be involved with succession planning might have? Would it be giving up control, actually, or is it worrying about cash, or what do you find, David?
Sure. So it varies from situation to situation. Oftentimes you will see control being an issue. Someone's used to calling all the shots, working for themselves, not having to deal with anyone else having a role in decision making, and so control can be an issue. And of course, sometimes they're correct and they're not ready to give up control. And there are plans that we can put in place for that. You can start making a plan for succession and moving assets out of your estate for estate planning by creating a voting share of stock and non-voting share of stock, and moving the non-voting shares out of your estate so that for estate tax purposes you might have been able to move some of the company out of your control, but you still maintain control because you own the voting shares. So there are things that you can do, but control is oftentimes a big issue that needs to be addressed.
Do you find that it works better if there is a gradual lessening of control so that someone gets a taste of what it's like to not make each and every decision at every moment? Or is it better if they say, you come to a conclusion that this is going to be done, and it's just better if you not witness those ongoing decisions being made that aren't yours and you don't agree with?
Every situation is different. Sometimes it's better to rip the Band-Aid off, and sometimes it's better to gently pull it a little bit at a time. It depends on the dynamic of the business and the people involved in all of that. So if you're able to take a little step back, but without giving up full control, and not question everything that whoever is now making the decisions, every decision they make, then there's some merit to that. But if you're going to second guess everything and you're not want to be part of, I can't look at that. That's just rip the Band-Aid and let them go, and just make sure it's done in a way that you're protected and you're being paid for whatever you need to be paid for, or that there's some way that your income is protected if that needs to be.
Do you give input about those kinds of decisions, as well as the legal structures that are in place and the insurance options that are in place?
Yes, that's all part of the counseling part of it, because what the decision's going to be drives the legal documents that need to be done and the legal advice that's being given. So that, yes, that's part of the input, the information input you need to give that advice to have the plan work successfully.
Sounds like you're a mediator as well.
Sometimes.
What about spouses being involved? Do they end up muddying the waters? When you have a business, do you just and only deal with that business owner, or do you get the spouse involved and then change that dynamic too?
It depends on the business, and it depends on the situation and the family and all of those dynamics. And many family businesses, when we're going down to the second generation, the person who started it wants only family members involved in that and doesn't want any input from other people, because that's not what they want. And other times they might have a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law who they think are very capable, and more capable maybe than their own children, and they want them involved. So again, it's family dynamics and the people who are involved.
Sounds like our communication is certainly a good idea, and it seems like that would be an imperative when you're dealing with those things.
Absolutely.
So in terms of business succession planning, we wish you luck. Clearly, we've determined that this is not a do-it-yourself operation. We wish you the best. Stay tuned to The Law Matters, because as we say, it matters to you.